I found that it was almost like a process, and I think that's fairly common too. It doesn't have to be, something went bang. It could be just you did loads of little things, and the analogy I like to use is like a bank account. So you're continually taking withdrawals, small amounts at a time, until you get yourself into overdraft, and it's when you hit the overdraft that's when it can become a problem.
And what was that moment for you when you really realised you came home and you weren't coping how you should have been?
I mean, hindsight's a powerful thing. So I can look back now and see that perhaps elements of my personality post-Afghanistan perhaps weren't how I am now and probably weren't quite right, if that makes sense. But for me, there was one really angry incident where, I had a massive angry overreaction to something that happened at work. And it coincided with having received some education from the Army about PTSD, because it was something the Army was really starting to come alive to. And I was able to recognise in myself that things weren't quite right. And then I was able to ask for help. What
was the angry episode?
So it was really banal. I was on a phone call to someone from our higher headquarters who annoyed me.
People can identify with that.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Everyone's been there. Higher headquarters is always an ass, is the saying. So I'd come off the phone to my higher headquarters, put it down. My boss asked me something that I didn't want to do. And I just, I flipped and went out to a room at the back and broke a keyboard and punched a wall. It was all fairly melodramatic, and then stormed out and sat on a park bench and had a word with myself.
And was that a bit of a moment for you?
Yeah, it was. I was seething. Heart was racing, and fists were clenched. And I sat on this park bench, and I just thought to myself, this isn't normal.
Yeah,
this isn't right. It's not. And it's having had that education on PTSD, I was like, these are symptoms. I know they are. So I went to the doctor.
We'll come back to that in just a moment, but in terms of other ways of it manifesting, just in case it helps others as well, I know that this is quite specific, but you also had had difficulty with the sound of helicopters, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, on my third tour, we used helicopters a lot, the big Chinook helicopters. And that was also the casualty evacuation platform we used to use. So, the sound of those helicopters was directly linked to some very high stress moments. And I found if a Chinook flew over my house, which was quite common because we're an air assault brigade, there are a lot of helicopters. If a Chinook flew over my house at night, that was me awake for the night.
Back here in the UK?
Yeah, back in my house in Colchester, yeah. So that was a very strange reaction. Other things, I came home from tour and we went on holiday. My ex-wife and I went on holiday to Egypt. And she thought I was eyeing up all the other ladies that were there, but I wasn't. I was on permanent 360-degree head swivel because that's what you do on patrol. You're always scanning 360 degrees and being aware of your surroundings. And going from having to do that every single day to not doing it, I found that really hard to switch off. And the other symptom probably for me was, there was a couple of instances where a very loud noise would make me. It was a bit of a cliche, I wasn't diving for cover in the street, but I would certainly...
But you would go down?
Yeah, I would hunch and maybe take a knee, for a loud bang in the street. So, the first two went away quite quickly, but the helicopters thing, that lingered for a while.
Just carried on. And did it affect your personal life? Friends, family?
Yeah, I know. I had friends on tour notice that I perhaps was a little bit angrier than I had been back in camp. And these sorts of things are bound to impact on personal relationships. I think that's an inevitability of any sort of behavioural change.
You say you then rang the doctor. Was that a military doctor?
Yeah, we're really lucky. We've got a medical centre on camp in Colchester, so I just booked myself in with the medical officer. And it's really good actually because they're quite alive to this issue as well. So all I had to do was say I'm having anger issues, and that's all I needed to say to the doc, which was brilliant. So they then referred me straight to the Department of Community Mental Health, which I think is a really good thing that the Army do because, doctors and nurses in the Army do wear rank. And if you're a private soldier or, a junior non-commissioned officer, then talking to a captain or a major might be quite intimidating about this. Whereas to civilianise it by pushing you straight to the mental health team, I think, makes it so much easier for soldiers to come forward and talk about it.
Do you think, though, it is easy for all troops to see a military doctor at the moment?
Yeah, I think it is. Every garrison I know has a med centre, and they're pretty good at turning stuff around. The level of health treatment we get for physical injuries as well as mental injuries is really high.
I suppose also the other side of that, though, is if they would feel they were weak or there was a shame to it and a stigma to it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I've spoken out. Is because if you can see a major in the paras, I've got a shaved head and tattoos, and
Yeah.
I don't.
You are rather striking. I would not mess.
I think if anyone saw me, you'd never really guess, and I've had that from friends since I've spoken out. He said they never would have guessed. If I can speak out, and look, I've had a perfectly normal career. There's been no impact on my career whatsoever for this. If I can do it, anyone can.
What sort of treatment and help did you receive?
It was really interesting, actually. I think they assess it based on need, so they don't go for a sort of blanket approach to everyone. But for me, mine was clearly caused by unprocessed emotion. My mind hadn't processed the things I'd been through. I'd kind of just done it, parked it in my back pocket, and never really, learned to cope with it. So it was cognitive behavioural therapy is what they did with me, where poor Laura, the lady that did it, had to sit down with me and just listen to me talk about everything I'd done in Afghanistan. And it was, it was like an hour-long session. I think it was a real experience. And then she moved her hand and repeated back to me everything I'd just said, whilst I followed her hand with my eyes. It's really odd. It sounds crazy talking about it, but it was amazingly effective. And after I think it was 3 sessions, all of a sudden I was sleeping all the way through the night like a baby, and feeling a lot calmer. So it's
has it helped? Like, part of CBT is that it retrains the way you think about things, isn't it? And has it helped you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you combine it with the mental resilience training that we get taught as well, things like mindfulness actually are really, really effective.
Because I was going to ask about this. Basic training for recruits now includes mental resilience training.
Yeah.
Did you have anything like that?
No, this is a new initiative, and I think it's a really good indicator of how far the Army's come. So, halfway through my time as an officer, we started getting educated about PTSD, and now that's come forward leaps and strides to talk about things like mindfulness and that mental resilience in training. We had a recent documentary, go out about the paras, and, the ITV team showed a lot of shouting and screaming, but, that made good TV. But what they didn't show was the amount of hard work our instructors put in the background to help these recruits, develop that mindset that makes them better able to deal with challenges.
Do you think there's enough to make sure that people go through the right processes when they come home to check that they are okay? Because, of course, what's striking about your situation is you self-referred.
Yeah.
There'll be some people, whether it's because of stigma, and I recognise this is part of the reason why you're speaking out, or they don't recognise why they are the way they are, that won't put themselves forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's on the chain of commands. That's on people like me to make sure that the guys underneath me get proper training in this business. So whilst they get taught it at training, there is now an Army policy that's supporting this. In addition, in 3 para, my unit, we're running a cognitive day, we're calling it, where we're going to deal with every aspect of mental health, as well as personal development and education, and all bundling it together. And the more that we educate our people, the better they'll A, be able to identify it in others, and B, be able to identify it in themselves.
I mean, it's just mad when you think about, you've mentioned your family there, and there'll be lots of people listening whose family served, or if not themselves as well, but that they went into World War I, they went into World War II with no training and no aftercare. I mean, there's generations of mainly men, up until recently, who saw the most horrific things and had to cope.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in the last week, I've been looking at my own great-grandfather, who was in the Devonshires in World War I, and he was, shot through the thigh at the Battle of Arras, and came home after that. And you look at the losses of those battalions at that battle. They lost thousands of blokes, and compared to what we went through in Helmand, that's a different league. It's incredible. You can only think how horrific it must have been for those poor blokes. How
has your dad reacted to you talking out about PTSD, and your family?
Oh, my family have been lovely, to be fair. They've, they've been really supportive, 100% supportive.
But has he reflected on how much the Army and the military has changed because of this?
Do you know what? That's probably a conversation we need to have. He was a search and rescue pilot, so, he's seen some pretty unpleasant things, and, pulling people out of the water, perhaps in not the best condition. So, yes, I hadn't actually thought of that, but... Thank you. I'll take that away. I'll take that away from this
Forcing
interview.
you to have conversations potentially with your family. But no, I mean, just because you've got that military link, I wondered if there had been a reaction to that. And how has it been with the wider public, with other people you work with, that you've spoken about this while still being in the military?
No, everyone's been great, to be fair.
Were you nervous about talking?
Yeah, really nervous. I mean, it was a pretty arduous experience because you're sticking your head above the parapet and you don't know how people will react, and also
in a way you've not been trained for.
Yeah, absolutely. But also I've had to dig up some stuff that is not very pleasant to think about
and to share with people.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been a fairly arduous experience, but ultimately worthwhile for the the wider education that we've hopefully been able to do.
How would you feel if you had to go on another tour?
I went to one last year. I went to Bosnia.
And so you've done that since?
Since, yeah. Okay. So in the last 6 months I've been on tour. And it was fine. And you know what? I think it's testimony to how good the, it's testimony to how good the treatment is. It really is effective if you catch it right. But secondly, how well supported I was by my team and my regiment when I was out there.